Hey everyone, welcome back to the Filipino-American Woman Project podcast show. This is Nani, your co-host, and I am here with our founder, producer, and other co-host, Jen Amos.
Hey everyone.
Hello, Jen. Before we get started today, we want to take a minute to celebrate. It's still October, so we want to take a minute to celebrate Filipino-American History Month with you guys, like we said in our last episode, and give a shout out to a Pinay visionary that you guys have shared with us and wanted us to feature on the show. So today, the Pinay we have to feature was shared to us by @Optimist on Instagram, the same person that recommended the Pinay that we featured in our last episode, Nina Parks. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about, well, Jen, do you want to tell them who we're talking a little bit about?
Oh, it would be my pleasure. So we wanted to share with you today another Pinay visionary, as Nani had mentioned. And thanks to Optimus, we decided to look into Rocky Rivera. So a little bit about Rocky Rivera. She is an artist who makes movement music for the masses. Rocky's music is a soundtrack for social justice and a rallying cry to challenge the dominant norms of society. Since her first project, Rocky has been challenging the normalcy of misogyny and patriarchy plaguing hip-hop. But the most important element of Rocky's music is that she creates a safe space to deconstruct the mechanisms of oppression while never losing musicality. So that is Rocky Rivera. Just so you all know, at least for me, this is the first time I'm hearing about her. I found her on Instagram. She has a lot of followers. And so that tells me that I need to listen to her. And for someone who is not living in the Bay Area, I think you can forgive me that I am not aware of her. So I want to thank Optimus on Instagram for recommending her. And Nani and I had a chance to do some research into her and share a little bit about her with you today. Oh, I didn't add this, but Rocky Rivera is a Bay Area rapper. It's really cool because I feel like a lot of the recommendations we are receiving are people from the Bay Area. And for someone such as myself who's never been to the Bay Area, the more that I learn about the Bay Area, the more I am nudged, to come visit, which is going to happen. We don't know when, we don't know how, but it's going to happen. With that said, I want to thank you, Optimus, on Instagram for recommending Rocky Rivera. It's great to learn that there are female artists out there and Filipino-American women artists specifically. And so listeners, if you have a Pinay visionary in your life or there's a Pinay visionary that you look up to, please, we'd love to hear from you. You can direct message us on Instagram. You can email us at thefilipinoamericanwoman@gmail.com, or you can check out our show notes to learn the many ways you can get a hold of us. So we would love for you to not only give us the name of your Pinay visionary, but also explain why you consider them a Pinay visionary. And we'll be happy to give you a shout out and talk about that Pinay visionary on the show. I like to say Pinay visionary a lot because honestly, it's the first time I've heard that. And I love that Filipino-American History Month, the theme is about Pinay visionaries. With that said, happy Filipino-American History Month, everyone. And let's go ahead and get started with our episode. Welcome to the Filipino-American Women Project, a podcast show that shares stories and life lessons told by individuals living or have lived in America that are of Filipino descent and identify as female. I'm your host, Jen Amos, a fellow Filipino-American woman, and I'm excited for you to join us. Let's get started. All right. Hi, everyone. Jen Amos here with the Filipino-American Woman Project. And as always, I have my incredible host with me, Nani Dominguez. Nani, welcome back to the show.
Welcome back. Hey.
And we are excited because we actually have a special episode today, really dedicated to Filipino American History Month. Today, we actually have a guest that was on our show a couple of months ago. If you want to check out Anjelica Enaje's episode, you can go to episode 8, which is titled Choose to Live. And Anjelica, the reason why we have her back is because she is currently back in school studying literacy. And today we thought we would talk about Filipinx literacy for Filipino American History Month. So, a little background on Anjelica: she's a memoirist-in-progress and a fellow book nerd. Anjelica, welcome back to the show.
Yay. Thanks so much for having me back. I'm so excited. Ever since I came back to school, I've been super busy. It's like nonstop movements.
I think we're all exhausted. So maybe maybe our exhaustion will make this a very genuine, raw conversation. And I did not drink coffee today. So this might bring out a different side of Jen tonight. So Anjelica, the reason why we brought you on is because, in celebration of this month, I remember in our conversation back in episode 8, Nani and I were just so fascinated by your knowledge of Filipinx literacy. And I sort of knew that I was going to have you back on the show again to delve more into that. One of the biggest things that I learned from our conversation back in July is the Maria Clara archetype. Like I've understood it like very vaguely back then, but I really appreciated in that episode when you did like a deep delve into that. And so I'm really excited to dive into that. But what I'd like to do today for our listeners is I'm going to play student today. I'm going to play student and listener and a piggybacker. And I really would love to kind of hand off leading the interview questions with Nani, because I know that she was more prepared for this episode than I was, because I intentionally came on with an open mind wanting to learn. Okay, so Anjelica, for people that did not listen to your first episode with us, episode 8, and want to know what you're up to, why don't you share with us a snapshot of your life today? More importantly, what is keeping you busy and most excited?
Well, currently I am a grad student at the Graduate Center, CUNY in New York City. And I'm part of it's a newly launched program. So this is the first year it started. It's called the MA in Biography and Memoir. And it's basically like combining the things that I did in my undergrad in terms of like being like creative writing and then doing research. So, that's how I started with the Maria Clara memoir that I'm working on, and like doing the breakdown of the Maria Clara archetype and how I came to kind of live that kind of lifestyle, as well as and like trying to draw parallels between the character and then my own life. But yeah, it's basically just a memoir / literary critique on Rizal's novel, and there's like so much work I have to like get on with by now. So it's like my brain's still kind of frazzled, and even though it's been like I have a 2-week break from classes, so it's like I'm trying to like focus on both getLITfilam and then my thesis project and then my semester work. So it's like that's my daily life right now.
Very cool. For people that are hearing about getLITFam for the first time, what should they know about it?
So exciting news. In 1 week, so October 15th, I'm officially launching the getLITfilam website. And I think I'll like talk more about that later on, if that's cool.
Yes. Okay, cool. Well, it's great to hear about your life right now. I know when we last spoke, you were not in grad school. So it's just really cool to hear how much your life has shifted since we last spoke.
Yeah.
Now I'm excited because I get to play student and I get to sit back, and I'm going to let Nani run the show now. So Nani, take it away.
Hey guys. So Anjelica, in our first interview, you also
kind of introduced me to the Maria Clara archetype as well. I had heard of it before, but I had not done any kind of reading on it or extensive research. And so since our interview, I did purchase Rizal's novel. And I'm a really slow reader, so I haven't made a lot of progress with it, but I just wanted to get your thoughts and specifically how the Maria Clara archetype was introduced to you and kind of how you made the connection to it in your own life, before you realized that you were operating this way.
Yeah, so I came to the novel on my own. I actually have to reread it for the sake of my thesis project as well as for getLITfilam because I want to write about that in the future. So yeah, I got the novel in 2013 and reading the whole thing, it kind of reminded me a lot of like Russian literature. Just the way like the style of the storytelling that Rizal uses. I could say that it comes close to Dostoevsky, the Fyodor Dostoevsky, who's like the author of The Brothers Karamazov and, big name in Russian literature. And I want to do more research on who were Rizal's literary influences that got him to writing this novel. And it was published in...
Yeah, I know he wrote it from 1882 to 87.
Yeah, I think that's like concurrent with like Russian lit that was just coming out around that time, if I remember correctly. But yeah, I think like the style of the way he wrote it, it reminded me very much of the melodrama that comes up in Russian literature. And it's kind of interesting to see that in this novel that's portraying the Philippine life under Spanish colonialism. So I thought that was interesting. And I guess like in terms of characterization, it's almost like he was like trying to create certain archetypes for each character. So, you have the protagonist. His actual name is Crisostomo Ibarra. I said Cristobal in the last episode, but it's actually Crisostomo Ibarra. And the way that I can describe his characterization, he's like the hero or like the ideal Filipino man. Like he's perfect, he's well educated, he comes from a affluent family, and like in the novel, Crisostomo is trying to build a school for a village in the province. And he's supposed to be revered and heroic and all those things. And then there's the antagonist, who is Father Damaso. So Father Damaso, he's another archetype that's supposed to represent the corruption of the Catholic Church and the Spanish friars at the time, and how he's very domineering. And there's other characters in the novel that like I wish I could do like a full in-depth identification for each, but basically it was like Rizal knew what he was doing in terms of like creating the characters and trying to reflect the times of Spanish colonization in the Philippines. Somehow that kind of entered into our Filipino consciousness of how we identify certain peoples. The only great example I can use is Maria Clara herself and how she's been used as the ideal for Filipino women and girls, that this is how we should conduct ourselves and our behavior and attitudes.
Yeah, and I think that comes in part from having such a lack of resources up until now, at least, when we're trying to create some of our own that do shape those archetypes for us without even knowing it. Like I had mentioned earlier, before even knowing who Maria Clara was or reading the book or learning about the book, I feel like I walked around living within those parameters without even knowing it.
Yeah, I just find it very interesting how Rizal even constructed this kind of story and that somehow it permeated into real life.
Yeah, it's like we're all characters in his little mind.
It's scary.
Yeah.
when we had our first conversation, Angelica, in episode 8, talking about Maria Clara it was very enlightening for me. And I had mentioned this back then in episode 8. I'll keep repeating it for people that want to listen to it. But it was just very enlightening because I feel like my life, whether I knew it or not, was an uphill battle of trying to fight away from that type of archetype and really challenge it. And I feel like it was really difficult, because I feel like even my family didn't realize what they have me be and have me do. And so it's just crazy to think that the way that Filipinos should hold themselves was based off of a fictional character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
So it's all a lie.
It is. Stranger than fiction.
Or yeah, someone else's imagination, pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope this is reassuring and enlightening for our listeners who have gotten acquainted with the Maria Clara archetype and can understand like why they feel so conflicted. Because yeah, I mean, to me, it really does sound like we built our own persona and the things that we value based off of a lie or off of a fictional character. But I am curious, like you mentioned that Jose Rizal like created these characters. I imagine it was inspired by the times and maybe how Spaniards perceived women and how they put that upon Filipino women as a result.
Yeah, I'm like super curious about that, and that's something that I'm eventually gonna have to do more research on and present that, not just like in my master's program, but outside of it as well, because this is something that really has affected our lives and our families' lives for so many years. It's like someone has to be doing this kind of research and like putting it out there.
Yeah, and I think it's you.
I'm so tired. Like, this is all I think about.
Oh man, that's so crazy. Now, I'm just curious, like ever since you have come to this like epiphany and this realization and you're intensely studying it, do you feel like this has changed the way that you function in life and the way that you see yourself?
It definitely has. And it wasn't just, from reading the books, it's also even my interactions with other PhilAms, both the older generations and the younger, or like my age group, basically. Well, Race Panay is definitely a major step into that space and showing the importance of Filipino women being the storytellers and also creating our own stories. Aside from having not to like criticize, resolve the Philippine national hero, but I don't want my story to be told by a man and being fit into a certain box from his imagination. It's like, no, I can do it myself.
Yes, queen. Love it. Love it. Yeah, it is. I do find it quite interesting that, part of the reason why the Filipino American Women Project came into existence is because I felt like at least in my life, I didn't have enough female role models that were storytellers. And most of the storytelling I received about Filipino culture was through a male perspective, or in like an intensely historical perspective, like in history books, it just didn't resonate with me as much. And so this show has been very insightful and empowering even for myself to hear our stories directly through, Filipino American women. So yeah, Nani, did you have any thoughts on that?
Not yet. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on that, but I just
So I just had like questions since you're reading the novel, so like what's your experience reading it? It's like, is it something that you've ever read before, rather like something you'd read in school or like for leisure? Like how's the novel been for you?
I mean I'm literally still on page like 60 or 70.
Uh-huh.
Like because I'm just trying to take it all in. So I feel like I keep going back and rereading things if I feel like I start spacing out, but it's an interesting plot and there's like a lot of moving parts. It's also I think the books that I typically read are books that are written, like this year or within the last 10 years. And so it's a different like you said, style of writing to get used to, which, yeah, so it can be a little hard to focus on at times, but I'm trying to really focus on the meat and potatoes of the story because it's, yeah, I mean, just like everything we just said, I think it's really interesting that this one person's story is the only story that we've all had as Filipino Americans to kind of hold on to, and we've clung to it so much that even people around my generation or my age like have never heard of the book or Maria Clara that are, living, breathing, walking Maria Claras. And
Yeah.
it all stemmed from a fragment of this one man's imagination, like you said. And there's so much more to us, and there's so many more of us, and we all are so different that it's not fitting anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Like even with my background and like being an English major and like humanities, this is definitely a novel that will not be an easy read for many people because of the style, and then also having to know the history of the Philippines and also what was Rizal's motivations for writing this in the first place.
Yes.
So, yeah, I'm hoping to like figure out a way to make this easy on folks. Kind of like create a Spark Notes type of
Yes.
thing. So
I would definitely benefit from something like that. I want to read the actual story because I want, like I said, kind of the meat and potatoes of it,
yeah,
and I want to get the full effect. But what I'm also doing simultaneously while I'm working through the novel is also studying Philippine history on my own, like independently. And that has also helped put a lot of things into context for me that I otherwise wouldn't really understand just because of the time difference. And so, yeah, I mean, even just what I've read so far in the novel is just a lot of physical and emotional kind of the agonies of oppressed people. Things like hijacking religious beliefs to use as a tool of oppression, and just really heavy, heavy things like that I think you need to be like in the context of a classroom, or at least a conversational kind of learning environment to really grasp those concepts. It's also a really good or a really important thing for us to know about history and why the book was even written, what happened. I mean, I know that everybody knows he was executed, but, not just what's in the book, but how that transitioned into his life after. So, yeah, I think that we could all use a good history lesson in Filipino American history.
yeah, getting right on that.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Nani. How do you feel like learning about all of, because when we first started this project together, you had a very curious, open mind and about like everything Filipino culture. And since you've been reading this book and really delving into our history and stuff, I'm just curious, like how has this impacted your life so far?
I would say it's impacted it a lot very quickly. It's what consumes most of my time all of
Mhm.
a sudden. And I'm trying to find kind of a good pace. And while I'm trying to do that, I'm also thinking about how it applies to my life and the context of what I'm doing today and what I'm trying to do. And it feels really heavy at times. For me, it's really important to have a good understanding of our history because my whole life growing up, I would always ask my grandparents, my grandpa in specific, about like just saying like, "Will you take me to the Philippines? Would you ever go back?" And his answer is always no. Like he doesn't want to talk about he didn't want to talk about it pretty much at all, and all he would tell me was it's corrupt. It's corrupt. It's too corrupt.
Mm.
You don't want to go. Don't go there. It's corrupt. That's all he ever said. Like, would never ever elaborate, no matter how many questions I asked him. And he passed in like a year and a half ago almost. And ever since then, I just feel like, and this is kind of going on a tangent, and Jen knows a little bit more what I'm referencing, but my dad is very closed off to me. He's not into storytelling or talking about Filipino culture or history or anything. And so I don't want my kids to not know who they are and to not have any stories. And so it's really important for me to learn about these things So yeah, anyway, my point is that in learning about this, it's kind of, or doing this research, it kind of is answering all the questions I had when I would ask him why, when he would just tell me it's corrupt, it's corrupt, it's corrupt. Now I'm kind of understanding exactly what he meant. And while I don't have the same sentiments towards it as he did, I have a better understanding and I can respect his point of view a little bit more.
Yeah, I think it kind of makes us appreciate why our parents didn't share a lot of, their upbringing in the Philippines. Like my mom, she's not a big storyteller herself. And I imagine that it has a lot to do with generational trauma and colonialism and shame, for being Filipino. All right, Jen Amos here, jumping into the middle of our show, as I always do, to remind you why this show is possible. So, at the end of every episode, I tend to say, if you didn't catch our guest contact info, don't worry, we'll have those in the show notes. Check them out. I worked so hard on them. You're welcome. Well, it's been brought to my attention that our show notes are not as easy to find as I thought, which is why, starting summer 2020, the Filipino-American Women Project is proud to be partnering with Captivate, the world's only growth-oriented podcast host. Captivate is created for independent podcasters, designed from day one to help you to focus on audience growth and the expansion of your audio influence. One way that Captivate makes our lives easier as independent podcasters is by taking the guesswork out of making a website for your show. That's right, a website for your show. So listeners, starting summer 2020, finding our show notes will be so much easier, all thanks to Captivate. You're welcome, as always. If you're about to start podcasting or are getting burnt out from all the extra work of producing one, like building a website, consider a 7-day free trial, that's right, free, with Captivate by visiting thefilmwoman.com. That's the Film, short for Filipino-American Woman.com. Or, check out our show notes in the meantime, which is in the details section of each episode. Once again, you can visit thefilmwoman.com or visit the details section of this episode. Even though we can't learn directly from our parents, I think the way that they respond to us when we want to learn says it all. Like there's something that maybe in fact they were protecting us from. They didn't want us to go through that experience. They left the Philippines for a reason,
Yeah.
so it definitely does like add some insight. Like the more we learn around our family, that we can understand and be like, yeah, like if I went through what they went through, so I probably wouldn't want to tell my kids about it either.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it's just kind of like I think that this was the perfect timing for me to be spending the majority of my time working on this kind of stuff, just because I know that in those past years where I would hound my grandpa, like, why? If he would have responded with this information, I don't think I would have been ready to receive it.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think I just wanted to add that, in terms of our history, we're very limited on our sources, like trying to find out more about life in the Philippines, as well as like important events that our relatives and our families have experienced through their personal lives. And asking questions and listening to the stories of our families, that's pretty much our only resource at the moment, until like we can get more people to actually jot down the histories that we're sharing with each other and from our families. This is actually like an active research that's being done. I'm not really sure how to present it, but like I know it's like very hard for many of us in the diaspora to be like asking our parents or like grandparents or any relatives like questions about what was life like in the Philippines for them, because it could bring out certain trauma that none of us could be prepared to face. So it's like, but I know it's like it's a research that's been going on, at least like in the academy, and this is done by actual Filipino scholars. So there's this one author, her name is Lenny Strobel, and she has a background in psychology, but she focuses more on the indigenous Philippine practices. And she's also the director of the Center for Babaylan Studies, which is what I heard from my sister Jenna Lynn Umipig. And I've been doing a lot of reading by Strobel. And there's this one essay that she wrote in 1996, and it's called The Born Again Filipino. And a lot of her research comes from interviewing Filipino American college students, because that's like the age group where we would have our own Filipino awakenings.
Mm.
And she mentions how it's important to try to include like Filipino language into this kind of research when you're doing studies on Filipino groups, because a lot of what we like grew up with, like having stories from our parents, like in my experience, my both of my parents kind of loved to tell their stories of what life was like in the Philippines, kind of out of nowhere. But it actually becomes like a very valuable like research method in terms of like trying to figure out what was like the collective history of the Philippines versus like the personal stories of our families. And it's being used as a research method in order to understand the Filipino psyche, as well as how cultural values and upbringings have shaped our lives, basically. And it's done through like informal conversations, whether it's like chismes or like talking on the phone, or like you're cooking food together and just like exchanging stories. So it's like something that we didn't really think it had value in terms of like jotting down the histories and holding onto these stories for future use. It's now becoming something that's very valuable within the academy or within the research field.
Wow.
Yeah.
That does sound fascinating.
Yeah, like it's a lot of reading and research that, you know, it kind of opened my mind to it. So I'm hoping to like incorporate that into all of my works. But yeah, it's really important, like especially since it's Filipino American History Month, it is going to take a lot of time to like try to extract as much as we can from people that we know they've gone through certain events but never really had the space to like talk about it. And I think it's important for many of us, at least in this generation, to be able to hold that kind of space for our loved ones, to be able to tell these stories. Like it can be tricky because you want to like be considerate of like the feelings and the trauma that might surface, because you know in our culture we're told like, you know, not to like bring up certain things that could upset others or even ourselves. But I think like we need to have like a mind shift in which like our stories hold value. It doesn't matter what kind of value, under what context. It's like this is something that connects us to like our personal lives and to our roots even. The importance of like storytelling, like that's being passed down from generation to generation, and then we're at this moment where we could be preserving these memories and these stories, because who else is going to do it except for ourselves?
Right, right. And you're lucky if you had parents that, you know, did what your parents did and kind of just volunteered their stories for you so that you could have that background. And just like you said, for those of us who didn't, it's because that space was never held for them to feel comfortable expressing those thoughts and those feelings. And again, just like you said, it's extremely hard to find resources outside of your own family. And so, unfortunately, all that a lot of us grow up knowing is whatever our families have passed down to us. And so, maybe for those people, Angelica, what are some things about for those of us who have not had the luxury of having our family stories passed down to us and learning about our history in that way? What are some highlights of Filipino American history that you think every Filipino American should know. Filipinx American, sorry.
Yeah. I think like a great starting point, at least from what I've heard other Filipinx of how they had their own Filipino awakening, was reading this one novel that it is accessible and the language, it's easier than Rizal's novel. It's Carlos Bolosan's America is in the Heart.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
I
in my
think
Amazon cart.
yeah, that's like a very good gateway into learning about Filipinos in the US. The novel is described as semi-autobiographical, so it draws a lot from Bolosan's experience coming to the US in the 1930s, so around the Great Depression, and how there was a scarcity in jobs and the declining economy. So Carlos Bolosan, he talks about the experiences of many Filipino men, and they're considered the manongs since they are the first wave of Filipinos to immigrate to the US, and how they faced a lot of hardships and struggles and discrimination, particularly in the West Coast, where many of the manongs had to work in agricultural fields and the fish canneries to try to make money for survival as well as for sending back home to the Philippines. And it's a very heart-wrenching novel to read. I had the fortune to read it in a class called Filipino American Literature in college, which was taught by Luis Francia, who is a poet and writer. And it really brought out a lot of these emotions, from anger to sadness to, it was pretty much like reading the story of an ancestor that I never knew I had. And I think a lot of people will feel the same way when they read the novel, and feeling like they, like, now the novel was published in 1946, so that's about like 70-ish years ago. It's like, we're now at a time where we could be doing something to honor the legacy of the manongs and all our other ancestors that really had to like fight their way for like justice and for human rights, so that us as a generation could have lived this type of life where there isn't a lot of hardships, but there's still struggles even to this day in whatever context. So, that's a piece of history that I would recommend everyone to look into, because that's how we end up here in the US. No matter like what's our background or what was our family's reason for coming here, it's best to like honor the legacies of those that came before us, even if there's no like direct relation. There are many like Filipinos that came here and made sure that future generations wouldn't have to struggle the ways that they struggled in their time. And so like for me, like my way to honor that legacy is to like bring the importance of literature and writing from the Filipino perspective. And like that's one of the motivations of getLITfilam, just to like show the importance of our stories and that we're the ones that have to tell it. Like we can't let the gatekeepers of the literary canon to take a hold of our stories and our narratives, because they're not going to get it right. We're the ones that have to like really do that dirty work of digging into those very dark places that were considered like family secrets or things that our families wanted to keep only within the family. But once we learn that to tell the stories, we can see that a lot of other families have experienced similar struggles and hardships. So it's something that's worth putting out there, but in a very honorable way. So that's my sermon.
Oh man. Now that you share that, Anjelica, so I haven't brought this up on the show yet, but back in college, my exposure to Filipino culture was through Filipino culture nights, or FCNs, PCNs. Are any of you like familiar with those type of productions?
I heard
I've
of
heard of
them.
them, but I've never
I
been.
never went to one.
Yeah,
Okay,
same.
so
Yeah.
so shout out to Andres Bonifacio Samahan. It was the Filipino organization that I was a part of at San Diego State University. And I remember when I entered college, I was very like, I was a very self-loathing Filipina at the time for a number of reasons. And if you want to know those reasons, just listen to all the last episodes because I tend to bring them up pretty often. But I remember my best friend, we knew each other all the way back from third grade. I remember my freshman year, he decided to get super involved in college, and he decided to get involved with a production called FCN, or Filipino Culture Night. And he had invited me to watch his show. And I told him, I was like, I'm only going to go because it's you, because you're my best friend. But other than that, I don't want to be affiliated with like any Filipino organization or anything Filipino while I'm in college. Okay. Only because of you, because I love you. And we go way back to third grade. So I go to this Filipino culture night. And crazy how we're talking about this, because that production was all about Carlos Bulasan, or Bulasan, I think is how you pronounce it.
Yeah.
Bulasan. Okay. And the main character that, is playing was Carlos. And was it that? Yeah, it had to be that one. Was it that? No, actually, maybe it was the second production. My bad. No, it was definitely one of the productions that it was one of the productions that just extremely inspired me to get involved with Filipino culture nights. Like that was my window into learning about Filipino culture, so much that I ended up becoming a Filipino culture night coordinator my third year in college. And my production was a different type of story. It was more focused on, what happens to culture and community when we become more, when schools move online. And so my production was all about there's this college like in the future that half of the courses were online and half of the students would actually go on campus. But it was kind of showing the death of discussing the death of if we don't have this in-person community, what happens to our culture, what happens to whatever and stuff like that. So anyway, one of the productions that okay, I'm remembering now. So I remember my friend the first production my best friend invited me to was actually around the time of martial law and stuff like that. And then I believe it was the second year when we had the story about Carlos, oh my gosh, Carlos Bulosan. Am I pronouncing right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Carlos Bulosan. All right. And I vaguely remember, because this was a decade ago, guys, a decade ago. I remember I was one of the main three female actors who were exploring that history. We were kind of asking all the questions, and then we do flashbacks of the time when, Carlos Bulosan was involved and what he was doing in his journey and how difficult it was. And so I vaguely remember that. And so I think it's so cool that we're discussing this, because now I feel even though I studied my lines at that time, I knew so little about our culture that it really didn't make a lot of sense to me at that time. And so now that we're talking about it, it's man, I kind of want to, watch the recording of that again and see what I was missing out on, and even read his book. So, thank you for talking about this. It's helped me kind of remember my own background and how I started to, fall in love with our culture and learn more about our history. My way of having done that was through Filipino culture nights. And Carlos Bulosan was one of those stories that was featured.
Yeah, that's amazing. Unfortunately, I never had the opportunity to attend a Filipino culture night, because I also had this jaded view towards Filipino culture. So yeah, there was a Filipino cultural student organization on my college campus, but I was apprehensive to join it because I thought it was going to be like any other Filipino group that just wants to do your typical Filipino parties and chismes and whatever. So it was something that I didn't bother trying to get to learn about. But then it was only until after graduating college that I learned about what PCNs or FCNs were. And I never attended one, but I'm hoping somebody could invite me to one, shouting out putting out there. I think I could blend in. Like, yeah. But anyway, but I find it interesting that like these very groups are getting more into their culture and the history and like putting it on the stage performance. So that's something that I wish I had the opportunity of doing when I was still a student. Like it's kind of inspiring to think that young Filipinos are engaging in our culture and history in that way.
Yeah, it was a really big thing, at least when I was going to school. In fact, there's only two reasons why people would get involved in our Filipino organization was for, oh man, I totally forgot what the name of that one. Friendship games. So Friendship Games was an opportunity for Filipino organizations in California to get together and just compete. That was like one reason like why people would join the Filipino organization. The second reason was because of Filipino Culture Night. That's when our meetups, like our weekly meetings, would get the most populated because people either wanted to do sports and party hard, or they wanted to participate in a play and then party hard after. Either way, it ended up partying hard one way or the other.
Always, yes.
and let me tell you, after my production, I got so wasted. Like it was traditional, guys. Like it was so traditional to like after every major event, you would have this house party and you would be chugging like 151. I think that's what it was called, like the crazy intense like tequila. And you would just get so drunk and people would be throwing up everywhere and people would just sleep over like scattered all around the party house. Oh man, I remember those days for sure. But yeah, it was such a huge deal. In fact, like even running for Filipino Culture Night coordinator was a huge deal, at least in my day. And I remember I wanted to so passionately like become the coordinator because I felt like I had all this like kind of like what you were talking about, Anjelica. Like I was very apprehensive of being involved in the Filipino community. A little about my background, I was bullied by Filipino American women when I was in middle school, and I hadn't had the healthiest relationships with my relatives. And so I just had a very skewed perspective of the Filipino community. But something about Filipino culture nights really just like lit the fire inside of me. And I felt like I had to just share like all these mixed feelings I was having about our culture. And so I was actually involved with the Filipino culture nights like every year up until I graduated because I felt like I learned the most about my culture getting involved with those plays. And so, yeah, it's kind of crazy to talk about this and just for me to be talking about this out loud and realize how appreciative I am that I was in a school that valued this. Now, don't get me wrong, I was still apprehensive in the student organization, but I think it was about finding the right people to associate with that were not just there to party, but were actually there to learn about their culture.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, well, cool. Very insightful stuff. I wanted to check in with Nani and see if there are any other topics or questions you had for Anjelica.
I mean, I have a lot of notes here, and so I don't want to just be like spewing random things out. Like anything else in particular that you want to highlight, specifically a history like fact or something. I mean, just another one of the things that I had taken notes on from your Instagram stories was someone had responded about someone called Agent Edward Lansdale, who was basically, I don't know what his title was, but he controlled the seventh Filipino president, Ramon Magsaysay. And she said that he would do things as aggressive as like physically beating him if he refused to say out loud like a speech that the CIA had written for him, and little things like that kind of, I think that it's important, even if you don't want to like read a whole history book about it, I think it's important to highlight some of the ugly stuff. You know what I mean? What do you think about that?
I honestly don't remember talking about that.
Well, it was just someone had responded to your story and you had just reposted it, I guess.
Um,
But it doesn't
I
have to
think,
be that. Just like kind of an example. I'm still trying to work through like how I describe it. And so for me, in reading about like these different encounters, basically, it just makes me feel really hopeless in a way and frustrated. And I'm just trying to get out an example that might kind of invoke that. in our listeners? I guess that's why I earlier asked about like if you've had conversations with people or even read like literature from that was based in the Philippines versus based in America, like how people view the Marcos regime differently, and how some people still agree with his style.
Yeah, it's also something that I'm still trying to wrap my head around because
Yeah, same. That's why I'm
yeah,
like
it's
not really
really
sure how to phrase the question.
yeah, it's like it's really hard to like actually find any credible resources that talk about the corruption in the Philippines and especially with the Marcos regime. Um,
Yeah.
I was actually thinking about how like the times when I would ask my parents about it because they lived through that period. But from what I could remember, it seemed like the policies and the martial law that were enacted in that time, it seemed to like only affect directly those that lived in Manila and in that vicinity versus like my family, and they were living in the provinces in southern Luzon. I'm not entirely sure if martial law had like directly affected all parts of the Philippines, but like from what my family has said, that it was something that didn't really bother them so much. And it's not something that I could accept as is, but like I feel like there's like a story much deeper than that. And like kind of like bringing it back to the earlier part of the discussion, that we have to be careful of how we bring up these questions and stories for like our parents and our families, because it could surface the trauma. But from what I remember my parents telling me, like for my mom, she was more focused on her job as a nurse and in midwifery, and she was really trying to get her visa to be able to come to the US, because like her main concern at the time was my older brother needing that surgery for his heart condition, and it had to be done outside the US. So that was something that my mom had to focus her energy on. And I do remember her saying that she wasn't able to vote during the time, I think either to oust Marcos from his position or something like that. I think this was like 1984. Like that was when she came to US, but I think also at the same time that was when the Marcos regime was falling apart, if I remember correctly. And for my dad, it seemed like it didn't really bother him so much, and I wish I could have asked more about that because
I
he
think that's
has
why I
great
asked you that,
yeah.
is because my dad is the same way. He was in the Philippines, he was born there and lived there for like 7 years while Marcos was president. And he also is just very like indifferent about it. And that's why I'm kind of like, well, what did your parents tell you, you know?
Yeah. I feel like that's like something that is going to be a constant questioning about. I think like at the time that they told me, it was before I was like so adamant about recording the histories and the stories of my family. But I can still remember bits and pieces of it. For my dad, I know both my parents were in their late 20s, early 30s, around the time of Marcos. For my dad, I know that he kind of was part of a group that favored like American intervention to like get Marcos out of the government, but then have the Americans come back and colonize us for some
Yeah.
reason. I don't know.
Yeah,
But I
that's
can't.
exactly where I'm at in my history lesson with myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really crazy.
Well, I think we can all agree that there's a lot of holes in our stories, and those holes are hard to fill because, just like what you said, Angelica, we want to be very mindful and respectful of our family who may have gone through traumatic experiences. It's interesting because, back then I was so naive to think like, oh, my mom doesn't want to tell me anything because she's so like simple minded and she doesn't care,
Hmm.
but now that we're having this conversation of potential trauma, and which I know my mom had gone through her own form of trauma that she probably wouldn't identify as trauma. But I feel grateful to my sister, Josephine, who, when she was involved with Raise Panay earlier this year, which she really connected with my mom and asking her questions about like her childhood and what she went through with molestation within our family, within our relatives, and how that affected not just mom but also grandma. And we just kind of come from that lineage of women getting molested like within the family. So it's like I can't expect my mom to explain that to me, and so I'm really grateful for my sister to do that, or to have done that. But it also makes me realize that maybe my family had like there's more to that. That's just one of probably many things that I have to be respectful of, and I'm just going to have to try to figure out how to fill in those holes my own way, or possibly have the courage and really drop my own ego later in life, still have an ego, to connect with certain family members and really ask about like our history as a family.
Yeah.
Yes, that's actually, Jen, something that I want to talk to you about separately, because I just recently had that idea too of like interviewing my own family members.
Yeah, no, that would be really awesome. I want to say like I wish I came more prepared to this conversation, but I also am glad, because the fact of the matter is, and Anjelica, you mentioned this quite often throughout our conversation today, there's just not a lot of education, like not a lot of accessible resources and books and stuff available for us, where it's just easy to digest this information. And so that's kind of where my mental block is like I wish I could run into it casually. I wish it was part of my everyday life, to know about like what's going on in our culture. But for me to do that, I have to actively seek it out, hence this project. I had to actively connect with other Filipino American women to share their stories, because I didn't even know where to begin myself. I couldn't find it in my own family. And when I was in college, I had a lot of mixed emotions, even being involved in my Filipino organization. And then even the years after that, when I would kind of be in and out of the Filipino community, I just feel like it's just such an uphill battle to be Filipino, like in America. And I feel like I'm doing my best to meet myself where I'm at and not feel ashamed for not knowing, not feel ashamed for not even speaking Tagalog or the two other dialects I'm supposed to know. But hopefully, at least for our listeners and hearing me talk, that you can relate and know that like this, it's frustrating. Like it really is frustrating that, for some of us, like even yourself, Nani, like in our adult lives, like we have to go out of our way to learn our culture. And so, I feel like that's where I'm at right now. For me, I feel a little comforted talking to you, Anjelica, because you are someone who is investing so much time in learning about Filipinx literature and taking time with us today to talk about it. It's kind of like what you said about Jose Rizal and how like you wanted to redefine or rewrite your story as a Filipina American woman, and not like live based off of this, male's perspective of us. Like I feel most comfortable having these discussions with you ladies and all the ladies that we've had throughout the show. Cause otherwise, like I remember even talking to my male Filipino counterparts in college, it was still very difficult for me to learn from them, because most of the like the Filipino males I spoke to about our culture were very factual, very much about like, the history part, that it was really difficult for me to just internalize that. I feel like having conversations like this, I'm learning so much more about our culture and our history than I am, the other way around. And so I think if I'm going to have to spend the rest of my life learning history through us, fine with me. Like if that's how I'm going to process it, that's the way I'm going to process it.
Yeah, it kind of gives me hope that there are many of us right now that are actively trying to, I guess, like set up archives for our history and for our stories, so that the future generations would, have less of the burden to like collect these things, but, more so to add on to it. And that's something that gives me hope. And it gives me more motivation to keep doing all this work, despite how tired and frustrated I get every time I have to like sit down and then write a book. I actually am writing a book. Yeah. It's like being so tired. Like I can't even vocabularize anymore. I'm running out of words. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I think we can all relate to that that
Yeah.
feeling.
But it's fulfilling, like doing the writing and the reading, because I know like for sure sometime in the future there are going to be many people who are grateful that we have these things set out for them, and it's for us basically.
But just to normalize like this information being out in the open and taking up space essentially, because why shouldn't we? And yeah, I think that a lot of us learn about our history through either our family or like things like cultural nights or different cultural events. There's so many of us setting up our own archives because that's exactly what we're doing. But I also want to recognize that that's a luxury that has not been afforded to our ancestors in the past, that
Yeah.
a big part of our history is oppression and
Mm.
erasure. You know,
Yeah.
a big part of our history is being forced in a direction that we weren't originally looking in or didn't decide to go down. And I think that that's kind of like the ugly part that nobody wants to hear about, but I think it's necessary to at least have a general idea of so that you can really appreciate.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important to like also realize that it's okay to feel frustrated, and that we seem to have a lack of a history or like gaps in the history, because we weren't the ones that wrote the official history. It's like something that was erased from our collective memories and history, and it's up to us ourselves to be filling in the gaps. This is something that comes up a lot, at least like in my recent studies, how the academy has affected the way that we validate certain facts and stories. It's very frustrating because you have to combat with many people who say like, no, this is the thing that is the fact, that's the truth. And then you have another group that's like, well, that's not how I grew up listening to it, and I'm drawing my facts from people that actually lived through it. It's like this constant battle between what is actually like validated versus like what is actually a lived experience, and like who's the one to like say that this is what actually happened,
Right.
and where you're getting your sources.
Right. And we have to understand that also where we are, we're here in America, and the education that we've received, no matter what the class is called, is an installation of the American version of whatever really happened, you
Yeah.
know? And I think that's also really important to note too. You know, I was just talking to one of my friends yesterday, last night, who is a Filipino teacher and was saying exactly that, they have to teach this curriculum that they may at certain parts stop and be like, what? Like based on my experience or my knowledge from
Mm.
elsewhere, this is contradictory, but here I am at my job and I have to teach it anyway. That's also something to consider.
Yeah. It's I'm sorry, I just feel so tired just thinking about my recent conversations the last few weeks with my program. Like last week, I had to attend a seminar by this person who teaches at prominent universities, and how, the subject was on oral history. And from what I could recall, it felt like it seemed like to them it was something that was revolutionary, and it could be a game changer within like the research field, in terms of like gathering biography and memoir, or basically like anything that has to deal with writing about life of another person. And throughout the whole seminar, I'm just sitting there thinking, this is something that I grew up with actually, and you're trying to tell me that this is something that everyone should be doing because it's like such a new revolutionary thing. It's like, no, this is something that my mom has taught me, my dad and my brother, any other relative I have that has sat down with me, like doing whatever, and then just suddenly telling a story. And it breaks into like questions of like the correlation between that personal memory versus the historical event. And, for Filipinos, oral history has been our thing for many centuries, even in the indigenous Philippines, like before we had colonization happen to us. And I had to politely tell this person, that was our thing. And yeah, I guess it's just like one of those things in grad school where you're like having to like combat with like your personal experience versus like what's set in stone within the academy.
Mm.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about something that you said on a previous episode. I don't remember what we were talking about, but you were talking about people sharing their stories and how it might not always be factual to you or to someone else, to an outsider listening, but that it's very much real for them. And I think that that's something that, or maybe that's a reason that I struggled a lot in school because I had a really hard time just accepting whatever someone was telling me as the truth. I'm the one that is always like, well, what about this? Like playing devil's advocate and trying to poke holes in your story. And yeah, I think that that's something to consider, like your personal experience based on the curriculum that you're learning or whoever's story you're absorbing can both exist at one time is kind of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
It goes back to what I was trying to say about how your personal experience can exist with someone else. Your truth can also exist in conjunction with someone else's truth, but that can be a really hard ground to navigate, i.e., my conversation with my dad that, happened a week or two ago, but I'm still sitting here like, what should I have said or what can I say now to kind of like just open it. I don't want to change his mind, but just open it up a little, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's kind of funny because, like, for my family, when I started having like my pursuit in Filipinx literature, I remember like my mom saying something like, it's great that you're engaging with the Filipino culture this way because when you were younger, it seemed like you weren't very interested in it. And I was very confused because I had always been curious about the Filipino culture, but it wasn't like I had the language to articulate that need or that desire. So yeah, it's kind of like, you have like one type of existence happening at the same time. It's just like the matter of communicating that or finding the words to like articulate that need. I guess there has to be something to kind of like trigger that desire to like actively become engaged in learning about the Filipino culture ourselves. As much as like our parents like care about us and wanting to provide us with a certain lifestyle that they may not have had the fortune growing up with, but then it comes at the cost of losing the opportunity to learn about the Filipino culture, like
Yes,
for our
exactly.
own growing up.
Exactly. And that need that they felt in their generations to assimilate and become more American and fit in, essentially, what they didn't realize, I don't think, what they were doing is that they were erasing our culture and they were erasing these like parts of ourselves, historically for their kids and their grandkids, which is, neither here nor there because obviously that wasn't intentional. But when you look at it from a historical standpoint, it was, and we just were
Yeah.
caught in such chaos. And yeah, sorry, it makes me feel frustrated.
It's always frustrating.
Yeah.
Well, I remember what I wanted to say earlier about, like sometimes the stories that we tell ourselves are not always factual. So going back to that. And so I feel like today in our generation, we have the luxury to study, and to research and to do this whole scavenger hunt of learning about our history and our culture and finding the books that can help us make the most sense out of all of this. I also think that we're in a very, what do you call it? We're in a very fortunate time where we have the power to not just document these stories as soon as we find them, but document our own stories and focus on distribution. I think that's the most important thing because a lot of us are stuck right now. A lot of us feel like there's these holes that need to be filled. And I think collectively, together as a community, we can help, fill in these holes by distributing our stories and sharing the resources that we find to one another. And knowing what we know about like our family and the generations that have come before us, I think it's quite an honor that we are in a position to write our own history now. I think there's no better time to do it than now. Do you ladies agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I feel like that's my greatest takeaway from our conversation and doing this podcast show. And part of why we have gotten so much exposure in just the last couple of months, I think it's just because we're in a place now where our community wants it. And we want to work together. Like I could think of a number of people who are authors or who put together events, to continue learning, teaching Tagalog. There's so many people we've had throughout, these interviews where we are being the change that we want to see. And I just couldn't feel more fortunate and grateful and blessed to be in this position with you ladies and really with our community as a whole.
Same. Back at you.
You're a Pinay visionary.
Yes, you are.
Yes, according to let me give him a shout out since we're talking about this. I want to make sure I do justice to their name. Yeah, so I just want to give a shout out to the Filipino-American Foundation for Charities that's in Washington, D.C. metro area for just giving the Filipino-American Women Project and myself, I guess, and a shout out about being a Pinay visionary this month, because if this is the first episode you're listening to this month in October, you should know that the theme for Filipino American History Month is Pinay visionaries, and identifying the visionaries in your life who are alive and kicking or the ones who have come before us. So thank you. Both of you for saying that.
Yes, congratulations.
Thank you.
Well
thank you.
deserved.
Thank you. I say that like shyly, but also I know I don't like turn down the compliment. It's more like, it's like, yeah, it's just really cool that what we're doing is affecting people and in a very positive way. And that's all I hope to continue to do. And I want to speak to our listeners, if you're listening and you haven't shared your story yet, or throughout this whole conversation, you thought of resources or books that you want to recommend, please reach out to us. You can learn more about that in the show notes, or you can reach out to us on Instagram, the Filipino American Woman. And we would love to just have this collection of history and resources and books and just everything, so that not someone such as myself who can absorb it all, because it's a lot, but hopefully we can kind of collect all of these items and all of these resources, so that our community doesn't feel like they have to do the scavenger hunt as much, even to just listen to these shows and hear a book that's recommended. Hopefully that it will be a catalyst for our listeners to read it and let that be the next, like the baby step or the catalyst, as I said, or the stepping stone, to seek out more resources and more items, or even, join in on our conversations. That's kind of my piece on it, and what we're talking about so far. Does anyone else want to add to the conversation?
Just like a little self-promotion.
Yes.
getLITfilam. Like I am trying to put together that catalog of books where you can read the books by and about people of Filipino descent. So there's a wide range of genre, from fiction to nonfiction, poetry, and also even like, well, let's just say academic research going on. So I'm like trying to put together that catalog, and it's based on like my own personal collection as well as what's ever getting around the FAHM circle online, and also book recommendations. And it's gonna be a growing list. So like I highly welcome any recommendations that anyone has. And also with the getLITfilam on the website, that's gonna come out next week. I will be posting essays/reviews about each book that does come my way, so that folks can get some sort of like a guide into if they decide to read the certain book, or like they need help trying to like break down certain topics and concepts that need further explanation. Because I know like some of the material that's out there, it's written under the assumption that the reader would have known like that type of study. And so like that's what I'm gonna try to do with getLITfilam through the essays and reviews, like try to like bring in more nuance to those certain areas that the authors are talking about. Even trying to like explain, like, okay, I'm like trying to put together some sort of like virtual classroom kind of vibe where, you know, a lot of like the things that get talked about in literature can be confusing. Like if you're not familiar with like certain concepts or jargon that comes up in literary circles, I do have like a section where I do a breakdown of those terms. So something like the word decolonization, that's a word that comes up a lot in many of the FAHM circles, but it's kind of hard to like find a very clear, simple definition of what decolonization means.
Mm.
But it's something that a lot of us are actively doing, or you know, subconsciously doing. So decolonization is, in definition, the unraveling of certain attitudes and behaviors that were taught to us under colonial mentality, and trying to reform ourselves and our thinking as Filipinos, just to undo the things that we thought was like one way of living or what defines us Filipino, but it's actually something that has a lot of oppressive history behind it. And I try to explain that in simple terms, and also cite the resources where I get that information, because you know it's important to give credit where it's due. And I credit Lenny Strobel for providing that definition, because that's basically her research and she's putting that out there. So getLITfilam is something that I've been working on for a long time, and I'm really excited to finally put it out there. And I really hope that it's a space where folks can come in, like if they are avid readers or they're just starting to get into reading more. And you know, I want it to be like an accessible resource where you may not be in school for whatever reason, or you're in an area where there aren't a lot of Filipinos around, that you can talk about literature or like Filipino culture. Like I'm hoping that this is what getLITfilam will be for many people, that it can be like your virtual classroom slash chill book club slash, you know, book nerd recommendation site. So there's that.
I love it. Yeah, I think that that maybe would have been a good place to start this conversation, with maybe like defining what decolonization is and talking a little bit about that. And I've heard on of the other like Pinay podcasts, kind of a timeline or an overview of actual like historical events in the Filipino American history, or her story. But I'm really glad that our conversation was held in this kind of way today, just because I think it's important to understand what that means in the context of today and where you're at now, and you know, specifically pertaining to the Filipino American Women Project and identifying as that. So Thank you for sharing. And for all of our listeners, you can follow getLITfilam for the website launch for more of that timeline information.
Yes, and to piggyback off of that, Anjelica, I just am in admiration of the work that you're doing. You know, there was a part of me that had hoped with this podcast show I would be able to provide something like that, but I love how you're getting, down and dirty with the literature. And I feel like, for anyone that is listening to the show, hopefully this show was a bridge for you to connect with someone like Anjelica, who is really making this like her life's work right now, and providing these resources. And I especially like that I am learning about these resources in literature through you, Anjelica, as a Filipina, because like I had mentioned, like it just didn't resonate as well with me having heard it through my, male Filipino counterparts. So thank you, so much for what you're doing. And I wouldn't be surprised if this wasn't the last conversation we have on our show with you. So watch out.
Like, you know where to find me.
You're like, I'll be here for a while.
Well, I'm not going anywhere. I'm stuck here with my books. So
yeah, you have a whole novel to write.
Trying.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love knowing that there are, Filipinos in our community that are doing work like this, because, ultimately that's what I was hoping to find and hoping to connect with are women like me that have this desire to, learn more about themselves in a safe environment and in an encouraging, uplifting environment. And, just knowing what you're doing is like, makes me feel at ease knowing that when I'm ready, like when I have downtime to just delve into all this literature, I know that I can depend on you for that.
I'll do my best.
Well, I think you're already doing a great job. I want to go ahead and just kind of pivot a little. Nani, I know there were a couple of other questions you may have had for Anjelica. Did you still have any like on your list of things?
Not so much questions. I mean, I had a lot of notes on, maybe you can talk a little bit about, forgive me, I don't know how to say his last name, Larry Itliong?
Yeah, Itliong.
Okay, who he is, and Philip Veracruz. I know that they're two like historical figures in Filipino American history that are important if we wanted to highlight them. Or is there anyone else that you think would be more appropriate?
Yeah, I know some trivia about them. They were the farm workers that led the United Farm Workers
Labor organization.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's one. Yeah, they
that's
were the
about all
leaders
I know.
of the labor organization, and they were contemporaries of Cesar Chavez, who is the one that gets the most clout in regards to the labor organization. And I think they were also contemporaries of Bolosan, who was also part of that organization in his activism with organizing unions for the farm workers in the West Coast because of the poor working conditions of the agricultural fields and the need to organize and to demand rights for their protection and for their livelihood. Mm-hmm. And I wish I did a little bit more research on Itliong and De La Cruz, but they're definitely people that really fought for labor rights. And I think it has gone into effect to this day for those that are working in the agricultural fields. There's actually a children's book that's published under Bridge and Delta, and it's called Journey for Justice, The Life of Larry Itliong. And it's written by Dr. Don Mabalon and Gail Romasanta, and it's illustrated by Andre Sibayan. And it tells the story of Larry Itliong from his childhood to his activism and basically his life and how his legacy has carried on, not just for the farm workers, but for many Filipino Americans to this day. And I have the fortune of having my own copy of this book, thanks to Raise Panay raffle. And it's such an honor to have this included in my collection, and to even have something that's, with the focus for much younger Filipino American children to start learning about our history in the US. So it's great that there is a resource for that. And especially for us adults, like, we can start learning that history as well. Yeah.
That's awesome. I dig it. All right, listeners, there you have it. We are so fortunate to have Anjelica Enaje today to talk about, what she's doing in grad school and really creating a virtual resource for Filipinx literature. And if you want to learn more about that, you can check out our show notes. I'll also be providing some of the book references, or the books that have been referenced in the show notes for you, because I'm a super generous host. You're welcome. Anjelica, do you have any closing thoughts for our listeners?
Yeah, so I would highly suggest that you do consider getting more into story. And whether it's like your first time being a writer or being a reader, or wherever you are in your literary journey, always think that you're writing for yourself. And it's very important for us to really value our own stories, and also to honor the stories of our families and our relatives, and those that have experienced like significant events in our history. Because, this is a very long tradition that has been going on for centuries. And like what you said, Jen, that we are in a very fortunate time where we can actually document these stories and to distribute, because there's no other perfect person than ourselves to actually put it out there. So, get on it, get lit.
Love it. Yes.
Yes. And Nani, do you have any closing thoughts? I know that you had the most questions on the show. Anything else you want to share with our listeners?
No, I'm done talking your guys' ears off. I'm sorry.
Oh my gosh. Like, don't ever apologize on the show. I'm completely okay with you talking and abusing my time, which you're not.
Thank you. I just feel like I was like firing random shots at Anjelica like for 2 hours.
Like, I really appreciate your questions, Nani, and also Jen, for like interjecting and whatever. Like, I really am so fortunate to be in this space again, and you can like find me again wherever you want to like talk about stuff.
Yes. Yeah. And, overall, I am just super grateful. I feel like every episode we do on the Filipino American Woman Project podcast show just gets more deep and raw and just enlightening and insightful. Like, just fill in the blank of whatever adjective that just makes you feel more of yourself and embrace all that you are as a Filipina American woman, or just a Filipino American person, or someone of Filipino descent. So with that said, I want to thank you both again so much for your time, and also for our listeners. Thank you so much for listening in. We hope that you gained so much knowledge and wisdom from our show today. With that said, we are so excited to speak with you again on the next episode. So tune in next time.
Thank you guys for listening. Happy Filipino American History Month.
Hey, thanks so much. getLITfilams.
Hey everyone, Jen Amos here. Thank you so much for joining me at the end of the episode. I wanted to add a special announcement. So typically when we invite people to to listen in live for our episodes, we usually promote it through our Instagram stories. Well, with the bloopers or the outtakes I'm about to share with you after this announcement, I thought it would make sense to invite all of you to join Nani and I. Give me 1 second. I'm going to pull it up on the calendar here. We are inviting you, or at least I am, and I'm sure Nani's going to be completely okay with it, but to join us on our final episode for Filipino American History Month, in which we are planning on doing a collection of the Pinay visionaries that all of you have nominated. And the best part of it is that we're planning on drinking. Like, okay, just no filter. We're planning on drinking for this special episode, and we would love for our listeners to join in live. And so, if you are interested in joining in live and grabbing a drink with us virtually, it's the drinks aren't virtual though, but meeting with us will be virtual because Nani's in the West Coast and I'm in the East Coast. If you are interested, mark your calendar. It's going to be October 24th. 2019. And what was I going to say here? We're probably going to aim for 9 p.m. Eastern time. So if you're in like New York area, that's 9 p.m. or Virginia. If you are on the West Coast, that'll be Pacific time, which will be 6 o'clock. So there's a 3-hour gap. And everyone in between, I need to figure out, because I know we have listeners in Chicago. So let me just look that up for you all real quick because I am generous like that with time zones. That would be, let me see here. That would be Central Time, which is 1 hour behind the East Coast. So that would be 8 o'clock Central Time. Okay, so let me repeat that again. 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 8 p.m. Central Time, and 6 p.m. Pacific Time. You're welcome. But if you are interested in joining us to close out the month of Filipino American History Month and join us live and chat with us as Nani and I drink and talk about and celebrate the Pinay visionaries that you all have nominated via email, Insta stories, direct message and what have you, then please join us. Once again, that's October 24th, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 8 p.m. Central Time, and 6 p.m. Pacific time. All right. We hope to see you there. With that said, please enjoy these outtakes.
I know that Dr. Dawn Mabalon had her involvement with it. I think she did, right? Hold on. I want to get this right.
Yeah, no, do it.
Or I could just quickly get the book from my bookshelf right now.
Yeah, go
do it.
Yeah.
I just feel like we're hanging out right now,
Yeah, no, I'm about to pour myself a drink.
There you go.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, scratch everything I said before.
Oh, Nani, we should totally do that.
Okay, next interview.
Oh my God. Our closing interview for the month, you and I should totally do that. I am so down for that.
That's a great idea. Let's write that down.
Yes. Oh my God. It's going to be, I'm going to put it on the calendar.
I love that. Okay, send me an invite.
I will. Okay. All right. Okay, noted. Okay, go ahead, Anjelica.
Okay, so Jen just
how's that drink going, Nani?
I didn't actually pour it.
Oh man. It's gonna be perfect because because on the 24th, in which we're supposed to do our closing episode for the month, I won't have any other responsibilities, so I'll be more than happy to drink with you, Nani.
We might have to get on a little early and
yeah, but
cheers
just so you know, we do have an interview 5 o'clock your time. There's a 3-hour gap, so I'm gonna push down we're gonna kind of close that gap, and so we might be a little buzzed by the time we talk to Christy, or we could do it after Christy. We could do it after her, just so you know, because that might be better. Anyway, this is totally off the record.
I guess it doesn't really make a difference to me either way, before or after, but maybe after, I guess.
I'm gonna put it after because that's
probably a better idea.
You're gonna get my invite. It's
Okay, great.
updated, and so I'm gonna put like a drink emoji in that calendar invite.
Yes, I love it. Now I have something to look forward to.
Yes, me too. I was like, I gotta celebrate Filipino American History Month one way or the other. So
Right. In our own way.
yeah.
I know.
Exactly.
I almost